Welcome to Spirit Matters. This is Phil Goldberg on behalf of me and my co-host, Dennis Ramundi. We're on hiatus now in the summer of 2022. So we're posting some interviews I recorded with leading spiritual teachers last year. They were part of a special series on Unity Online Radio under the title of my book, Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times. I'm sure you'll find them illuminating and inspiring. Enjoy.
Practical spirituality. Positive messages. This is Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
You can have inner peace and clarity even in the midst of chaos. Welcome to Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times with Phil Goldberg.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this special series of programs named after my most recent book. Our goal is to bring you expert advice and guidance for remaining spiritually secure and strong in the most challenging times, not just the unprecedented pandemic we've been going through together, but any time the trials and tribulations of the crazy world arise in your life. Every episode features a wise, compassionate, experienced spiritual teacher. I've drawn from a broad range of traditions and paths, and I encourage you to write down any ideas that resonate with you so you can develop an inventory of practices to draw from when you need a spiritual boost and a way to reconnect with our divine source. Because we all have within us a sanctuary of peace and a fortress of strength, not something we have to build or look for. It's already present at the core of our being as our truest, deepest, highest self. All the spiritual traditions have the primary purpose of helping us realize what we truly are, eternal beings with an earthly curriculum. The more we connect to that infinite reality, the better equipped we are to face our challenges with dignity and take action to make the world a little less crazy. That said, let me introduce today's guest. Rami Shapiro transcends the usual spiritual categories and designations. He's a rabbi, grounded in Jewish tradition, also an initiate of the Ramakrishna order of Vedanta Hinduism, and something I didn't know before, a 32-degree Scottish Rite Mason. He's a truly interspiritual teacher, the author of about 36 books, including Perennial Wisdom for the Spiritually Independent, How to Be a Holy Rascal, and his latest, Surrendered. He's a contributing editor with Spirituality and Health magazine. He hosts 2 podcasts, and he's the co-director of the One River Foundation, which hosts too many programs for me to mention here. Welcome, Rami.
Thank you, Phil. My pleasure to be here. Always love talking with you.
We'll have a good time. Let's begin with a personal question. We've all been through the common experience of pandemic this last year. Did you find it personally challenging, and did anything about it and your response to it surprise you in any way?
Yeah, I would say, let's start with the easy part. It ruined my income stream, right? I make In the past, pre-COVID, I made my living traveling around the world teaching and getting paid for it. And when that was no longer possible, my income dried up. Zoom was available, but I never I never feel comfortable charging for a Zoom experience what I might charge for an in-person weekend. So my finances took a huge hit. So that was the only, I guess you say, hardship for me. It sounds terrible because I feel so privileged.
Yeah.
But the truth is that being forced to stay home and indoors simply removed the anxiety I would feel about having to go outdoors and deal with people I didn't want to deal with. So it was really taking a load off of me. But on a more positive note, it really stripped away everything I didn't want to do. It became very clear to me, as it has been for most of my life, but it made it all the more clear that what I love to do is to be alone. My personal spiritual practices are not community-based, so they did not suffer whatsoever. And my writing, which is my primary passion, that's a private enterprise. That's something I do by myself, and I could do it without a lot of interruptions because COVID removed all those interruptions.
I know exactly what you mean. I had to cancel a bunch of travel and actually book promotion, and found myself doing what I love best, staying home and writing. And now that things have started to open up, I thought, well, now I can do what I was going to do last fall, and I can do this and that. And I thought, nah.
That's interesting because I'm having the same experience. Do I want to go back? I'm doing a retreat, my first in-person retreat in such a long time, here in Tennessee at St. Mary's Retreat Center in Swanee, Tennessee. And I used to go there 3 times a year. Then they had to shut down, and they're trying to reopen. And they asked if I would basically, be part of the reopening faculty to try to get people back into the habit of going. And that's why I'm going, because I love the place, I love the people. But if it was an institution I wasn't already associated with, people I didn't already know, I don't feel the need to go out and do this work anymore. Maybe that's partly because I just turned 70 years old, and maybe that's a trigger to like, hey, you're adult enough not to have to do so many things you don't want to do. But I think it just, go ahead.
No, please finish that thought.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things COVID did for me is it stripped away the stuff I didn't want to do, even though I didn't know I didn't want to do it, and helped me clarify what really brings me joy in my life, and to focus more on that than on earning a living.
I wonder how many other people are having the same kind of experience. I hear it from others, but I travel in unusual circles. I don't mean travel. I mean, I know unusual people, and, people who tend to be introspective and like, staying home and doing their spiritual practices and reading and whatnot. I wonder if that's going to be the case with a broad number of people. You have a column called Roadside Assistance, and people write in. What have you been hearing from people this past year? What are the biggest challenges? What's the biggest learnings that you're
what's coming to the column Roadside Assistance for the spiritual traveler is that how do I grieve when my family members die and I can't be there? That is a very, it's profound, it's sad, it's poignant, and unfortunately all too common. People email me, or they email. I don't get letters really, but they email me, and it's, my aunt died, which is true for me personally. My mother died, my father died, a sibling died, a friend died, and I can't go. And I'm watching a funeral on Zoom. I I won't presume to present someone else's situation, but I had the same thing. My aunt died of COVID, and I watched strangers bury her at a distance. I watched on Zoom while the funeral, the graveyard folks, put her body in lowered the casket into the grave and covered her all up. And there was a rabbi in one part of her city and a cantor in another part of her city, and our family gathered all over the place, just via Zoom. It was cold, and everyone was doing their best. This is not an attack, a slight on the clergy. Everyone was doing their best to make this a meaningful event, but it wasn't. And it was just watching a screen, and it was horrible. And so people are writing and saying, so I went to the funeral via Zoom, but I didn't grieve. I was a passive observer. Nobody held me. I couldn't hold anybody. Nobody handed me a Kleenex. I didn't even feel like crying because it was like I was watching a show. That's a major thing that I'm hearing from people for the magazine.
And what do you tell people? Because somebody in your position has to deal with people who suffer loss and grief all the time. And our listeners right now, many of them have, like you, lost people during this past year. And if they haven't, they'll lose people later, or they did in the past. What do you tell people, especially during this period?
Well, what I try to do is offer them a practice that they can do for the deceased loved one, and also for their own benefit. There's a couple things you could talk about. One is too long to present here. It's something that I created for myself, based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, something that you can recite or read, because it is long. You can read to the deceased, even at a distance, with the I don't know, you want to say the assumption or the conceit that somehow, because we are all interconnected, your beloved can resonate to what you're saying. But even if that isn't true, you will resonate to what you're reading. So there's that one. But just metta practice, the Buddhist metta practice, which I don't do in the Buddhist way, and I can explain that very simply. But the idea of sending blessings to someone living or deceased is, I think, a very powerful, practical thing that one can do. I did it before COVID, years before COVID. I was sat with my dad on his deathbed, and I held his hand and I did metta practice. Now, the way I was taught to do it in a Buddhist context, but the way I actually practice comes from Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who was my Rebbe, my guru in Judaism. And he took the idea and he changed the verses. So what I said to my dad, and what I encourage people to say in any situation where it makes sense, you visualize the deceased, or you visualize your family members who are still alive, and you say to those, as individuals, you say it one at a time, you say to your beloved, may you be free from fear. May you be free from compulsion. May you be blessed with love. May you be blessed with peace. It's that simple. Free from fear, free from compulsion, blessed with love, blessed with peace. I find that a very powerful practice for myself. We don't have to go into it because it's a longer story, but it changed my life, and it changed my relationship with my dad specifically. But it's a relationship for the changing practice. And the way Reb Zalman taught it, you use fear and compulsion, because when you're afraid, your behaviors become compulsive. You're just responding to fear as opposed to the reality of the moment. And when fear is gone, love is present. So may you be free from fear, and then you're blessed with love. And when love is present, compulsivity ends. And when compulsivity ends, you're blessed with peace. So free from fear, free from compulsion, blessed with love, blessed with peace. And that's what I offer them. You can sit, you can watch the funeral, the Zoom call ends, and then you could sit quietly for a while thinking of your loved one, and then go through the family members who are all grieving and send them that meta blessing. And I think that's a powerful way to engage with this stuff, even when it isn't COVID times, but certainly when it is.
And in the Buddhist context, when they do metta practice, it's not just when you suffer a loss like that. It's a regular practice that people do to cultivate compassion, and presumably it's transformative for the person doing it. And as you said, it's a conceit that they may also, the practice may also be affecting the people you're visualizing or the people you're keeping in your heart at that time. Am I correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's my experience that all life is a manifesting of a non-dual aliveness. So everyone is interconnected, what Thich Nhat Hanh calls interbeing. We inter-are. And, you could take the analogy of throwing a pebble into a pond, and the ripples go out far beyond where the pebble hit the water. And so what you're doing in metta practice and other kinds of things like that, Tonglen, or maybe different prayer practices from different traditions. But what you're doing in that context is dropping a pebble of compassion in the pond of aliveness, and those ripples will reach out to the people that you're thinking of while you're doing it. I mean, I have no proof of that, but I don't need proof. I mean, it's just it's a it works on the doer, if not on the person that you're doing it for, whom you're doing it. But I think it does reach them. I got a sense, and of course, all of this is just your own egoic projection. But I got a sense holding my dad's hand doing this, even though he no longer spoke. He was on, I don't even know what unconscious means, but he couldn't communicate in the normal way. But I felt a relaxing in his body as I was doing this. I felt, or you could say I wanted to feel, but I'm going to take my experience at face value. I felt that he was surrendering into, or being surrendered into, his own dying with a sense of being surrounded by metta, by loving kindness. Right.
And I think even healthcare practitioners who are even secular people, they always encourage people to speak to their loved one who are in coma or may not, with the assumption that something comes through. So
and that's why in the longer thing that I offer, you're like in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, you're addressing the person and you're saying, look, you're dying and this is what's happening to you, and trust the process and listen to my voice and you're loved. You give them encouragement as they go through this transition. What's interesting to me after your introduction is the whole notion of who's dying and what's being transformed. I mean, you said that we are eternal beings with an earthly curriculum. Now, I don't know exactly what you have in mind, but I don't think we're separate. I think that you and I, and everything else, but you and I are both manifestings of the same dynamic process, being as a verb, not being as a noun. And the earthly part of it is simply part of the infinite manifesting. But there is no, in my view, there is no Rami that survives my physical death. Rami is simply a temporary expression of the infinite aliveness that happens while, in the X number of years that I'm conscious on the planet. But it's a temporary manifestation. The soul does not exist in any form separate from the absolute.
This is, of course, is a theological issue that we could debate, or else make a pledge that whoever dies first will let the other one know. If there's anybody, if there's an embodiment to do the communicating. But it also changes, I would think, in doing a practice like the one you described, once the loved one is gone, is there then any value to doing the metta practice for that person?
So it depends. Well, I would say yes for two reasons. One, I'm still there and I'm benefiting from it. But the other is I'm not sure what gone means.
Mm-hmm.
So, how long does it take for the egoic self to dissipate? I don't know. So does it happen as soon as the body ceases to breathe, as soon as there's no brain activity? Maybe, but I don't know. So I just err on the side of, I don't know, on the conservative side, that maybe there's consciousness that survives for a while. I mean, you could even make a case, and I wouldn't argue against it, if you said that the aliveness of which each of us is continues to happen on multiple dimensions. So, that this is just the earthly dimension is just one dimension that the aliveness experiences as Rami, and there'll be other dimensions. But my real concern is not the dimensionality issue, but the issue of separateness. I just don't experience anything as being other.
Got it. Let's switch topics a bit. Two of your books, at least two that I know of, are about addiction and recovery. And from what I gather, substance abuse has been during pandemic, and often is during any challenging time, a possible issue that people have to contend with. What do you tell people? What would you like listeners to know about dealing with destructive compulsions and addictions?
Well, I mean, that's a several-hour conversation in and of itself.
I'm sure.
The first thing, though, is if you're going to use, as I would, the word compulsion, you don't have control over it. So you're not, don't turn it into a self-critical, self-hating, self-loathing experience. So I mean, I'm a food addict. I'm in Overeaters Anonymous. So much for the anonymous part, since I just said that. But and I find 12-step to be a very, very helpful system of practice, because the cool thing about 12-step is less theory and much more about practice. I think that, or what I would tell someone is, if you're locked into this compulsive behavior, there is a way to get out. It's like the Four Noble Truths. Life is dukkha, life is stressful, suffering, however you want to translate that. It's caused by your compulsivity, your addictions. And then the third noble truth is there's a way out. And that's the Four Noble Truth, the Eightfold Path of the fourth of the Four Noble Truths. Or in this context, it's the 12 steps of originally Alcoholics Anonymous. So there's hope if you want to engage in the practices that will bring you hope. But I would say one other thing, just to the audience, the listener, that 12-step isn't just about brand-named addictions. That 12-step, if you read the big book, there's lots of stuff in the big book that people like. I'm sure there's stuff that they don't like. It's a very, it reflects the times in which it was written, as well as the author. But Bill W. in the big book has this line that I think is absolutely crucial. He says, the first thing you have to do is stop playing God. That to me is the universal addiction, that we're all playing God. In other words, we're all trying to control our life, and the only way you can do that is to control all the lives around you, to make things turn out the way you want them to turn out. And you can't control any of that, self or other. And so the real addiction is the addiction to the lowercase s self. And we have to break that. And the way to break that is the way to break any addiction. First, you have to experience rock bottom in one way or another. And when I say rock bottom, I don't mean it sounds like it's a once and for all thing, and then you get out of it. But I don't experience that way. I think rock bottom is basically what Ram Dass might call fierce grace. You know, the grace of the universe continually bringing me to this rock bottom, to my knees, to the realization that I cannot control what's going on within me or around me. I don't control my thoughts. I don't control my feelings. I certainly don't control anyone else's. So ultimately, what rock bottom brings us to is the grace of being surrendered to the greater reality in which all beings exist. And that is the liberation from the addiction to playing God and the addiction to control. And then you live your life like a good Taoist, right? you live your life with the singular practice of what the Chinese call wei wu wei, non-coercive action. And you work with the, you what do you call it? You just work with the flow of the universe in order to bring about alleviate as much suffering as you can and bring about as much goodness as you can, without claiming anything, without saying, I can control this, I can make it turn out the way I want. I think 12-step is a brilliant system when, and I'm going to say one more thing about it, when it is understood more deeply than it often is. So that we can explore that a little bit if you want.
Yes, I'd like to come back to that, but we have to take a quick break now. And I will say that's one of the things I always like talking to you about is you take commonplace things more deeply. And it's like Ramakrishna used to tell people, go deeper, go deeper. And you're a good catalyst for that. We have to take a break, and we'll be back in a minute with Rabbi Rami Shapiro.
We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Welcome to Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.
Welcome back to Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times with your host, Phil Goldberg.
We're back with Rabbi Rami Shapiro. Rami, we were talking about 12 steps and addiction and recovery. First question is, why don't you name the books of yours that deal with this subject so people can look further? And then I have a question. And that question is, you said being surrendered as opposed to surrendering. And I think that was a deliberate choice of language, and I want you to elaborate on surrendered.
Okay, I can do that easier than give you the titles of the books, because I have I can see them on my shelf, but not clearly enough to read the title. So the first one I wrote on 12-step was Recovery, the Sacred Art. And it was part of a series the publisher was doing called The Sacred Art. So every book I wrote for them always had that in the title. And it was an overview of the 12 steps from an interfaith perspective. So what are the Buddhists, how can meta practice help us with the 12 steps? How can something from Christianity help us with the 12 steps? So I was drawing from different traditions to enrich the way we might approach each of the steps. Then I wrote a book years after called Surrendered, just what you said in the passive, Surrendered. And that has a long subtitle, which has nothing to do with the sacred art, but Surrendered. And I forget what the subtitle is.
I have it right in front of me.
Oh, okay. So what is it?
Shattering the Illusion of Control and Falling into Grace with 12-Step Spirituality.
Absolutely brilliant title. I don't know who came up with that, but I think that's good. That's what the book is about. I use the passive because my experience in general, but my experience with 12-step showed me that I'm not in control. 12-step says, turn this over. I'm going to turn this over to my higher power. Well, I discovered that I can't, because the me that would be turning this over is the addicted me. If I could do that, I wouldn't be addicted. I wouldn't be an addict. And the higher power to whom I turn this over is God, in 12-step language, God as I understand God. But who's the I that understands God? It's the addicted me. So it's all ego. Now, I don't think this is really the work of 12-step, but this is the superficial reading. It's all about ego. So when I go to a meeting, if you're a Christian, you're going to say, where I live, almost everyone is Christian and certain kind of evangelical Christian. And so the higher power is Jesus. And they always talk about Jesus, and we do the Lord's Prayer. And, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. It's not my higher power. But then I think all of our gods of our understanding are only that. They're just that. It's your understanding. So I'm not moved or offended by it. I know that still here in Middle Tennessee, because it's so Christian in so many 12-step groups, there are separate Jewish groups where you're not going to hear that my higher power is Jesus. And you'll hear some other version of higher power. But to me, it's all an egoic projection. So eventually, you experience the fact that I'm not free, because I can't make myself free. I'm still playing God. And I have to stop doing that, but I don't have the capacity to stop doing that. So you keep hitting rock bottom until eventually you are shattered, or if you like Christian language, you're crucified on the cross of your own egoic madness. And that lowercase s self is shattered. And out of that brokenness, through the grace of the universe, right? Out of that brokenness, comes the liberated capital S self that has been, the little self has been surrendered, and in its place comes this much larger awakened self. I'm not talking about full enlightenment. I don't know what that is. Not, but you're not this trapped egoic self. The other thing that when I talk about going deeper, the very notion of a higher power is misleading, because it suggests a hierarchy that I don't think exists in the universe. That God isn't higher than us. I mean, the God of our understanding may be, because it's a projection of your ego. If you've been trained to imagine something bigger than you, who rewards and punishes you or whatever, then that's the God of your understanding. But my experience, not my understanding, but my experience is of a greater power, something larger than me, but not other than me and not higher than me, just bigger than me. So the analogy I like is the Hindu analogy of the ocean and the wave. So the greater power is the ocean, and you and I and every other being, human and otherwise, on the planet are waves of that ocean. What I want to do is get in touch with the oceanic, because the oceanic is never stuck. The oceanic is never addicted. And as you were saying earlier in a different context, you're already that. Tat tvam asi in the Sanskrit. You're it. You are already the oceanic. You don't have to get something that you're lacking. You simply have to realize who you really are. And you don't have to realize it ultimately by erasing yourself, but by allowing yourself to be surrendered to this greater reality of which you are a part. And then Rami, in my case, Rami gets to function much more healthily as an expression of this greater power than Rami did as a deluded person who thought that he was apart from rather than a part of this greater power.
I like that. Greater instead of higher. Excuse me. Now, in the course of the half hour or so we've been together, you've touched upon at least 4 of the major spiritual traditions. And I introduced you as an exemplar of interspirituality and what I used to call trans-traditional spirituality. So in your personal work and in your teaching, you draw from all the traditions, all the perennial wisdom of the world's spiritual pathways. Right. What are the advantages of exploring traditions outside the one you were born into or the one you adopted? And for people listening who are tempted to explore beyond those boundaries or already doing it, what are the advantages and what are the pitfalls?
Well, the advantages are that you get to see your own tradition in a more nuanced way. So, for example, I mean, my primary practice is Jewish. So, for example, every week I have a Shabbat on Saturday, Friday night, Saturday. And when I was growing up, because I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish home, there were strict, this is what Shabbat is, right? And this is what you do, and this is what you don't do. But I don't approach it that way anymore. And as I was trying to explore the deeper meaning of what a weekly Sabbath is about, my study of Taoism led me to realize that what the Sabbath could be, for me, what the Sabbath could be would be a day devoted to wei wu wei, to living without coercion, to effortless action, to not trying to, for one day a week, don't play God. I'm mixing my traditions here. But so it allowed me a much deeper realization of what that day could be without erasing what Judaism has to offer around it, but now seeing how to use those things in the tradition to accomplish the way I read the tradition as an opportunity for living your day without coercive action. Does that make sense? Yes.
I'd love to hear more.
Well, so bring on some other person. That's all I got.
That surely isn't the only advantage, just doing it.
Oh, back to the big question. No. Well, that is a big advantage, though, to see
yes.
A more nuanced view of your own tradition. You also see where, this is my experience anyway, you also get a chance to see where your tradition, your practice that you inherited as a Jew, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, whatever, where that practice is pointing. I mean, there's two ways to look at being anything, but let's just say being Jewish. You can look at being Jewish as an end in and of itself, that Judaism says do X, I do X because I'm a Jew, and the point of doing X is to be an observant X-doing Jew. So I keep kosher, because I grew up that way, but I keep kosher, and you could say, well, you keep kosher because Jews keep kosher, and so keeping kosher makes you a better Jew. It's just circular. It doesn't go anywhere. But the more I studied the traditions of kashrut, the traditions of kosher, you realize it's all about, on a deeper level, it's all about lifting up your consuming to the highest environmental and ethical standards you can muster. And, you see this, all these ancillary, is that the right word? There's all these these principles that are engaged with keeping kosher. One of them being something called tsar ba'alei chayim, which means not causing animals unnecessary suffering, which should lead you to be a vegetarian in my mind, which is what I am, but not causing any animal unnecessary suffering. Then, stop me if I'm not answering a question. Then I had an interview on my podcast with the Tibetan Buddhist monk, Matthew Ricard.
Ah, yes.
And I interviewed him several times, but one time we were talking, he had just published his book on the Tibetan tradition of rescuing animals, and in that way alleviating their suffering by getting them out of the place of suffering and rescuing them. And I thought, wow, that's part of kosher too. And how do I do that as part of enriching my understanding of how I live a kosher life? So it helps you look beyond the circular, the just I'm doing this because I'm a Jew and it makes me a better Jew, to say, no, this stuff is really about being more human. And being Jewish isn't for the sake of being Jewish. Being Jewish is for the sake, as it says in Genesis 12:3, for being a blessing to all the families of the earth, human and otherwise. So my goal is to be a blessing. Judaism is a vehicle for doing that. Now, having been raised Jewish, it's my primary vehicle for doing that. But the study of other traditions brings me constantly back to the bigger goal of being a blessing, and then oftentimes just enhances the way I can do my Jewish practice by learning from these others. The problem is that you end up, and the danger of this is it just becomes an exercise in collecting practices,
right,
without any overarching vision. So you say, oh, I like this practice in Hinduism, I'm going to do that for a little while, and I like this practice in Christianity, I'll do that one, and I'm going to do, something with Ramadan or, whatever it is from the different religions. And you're just doing it like it was a buffet. I have a little of this and a little of that. But it doesn't have an overarching goal, and therefore it doesn't serve any greater purpose than your own, I don't know, it just keeps you interested or keeps you distracted, or it's just, it's very superficial to me. I don't think, let me just get one more piece out now that I'm saying this, I don't think you have to pick one tradition. I think the Dalai Lama used to say this, I don't know if he still does. Pick one tradition and go deeply into it. I don't care about that. My concern is pick your goal. So for me, be a blessing. Pick your goal and go deeply into that, using whatever tools you can find in your own tradition or others to achieve that ultimate goal. So the depth is for the goal rather than the religious tradition.
Got it. And the depth is the key factor here. Houston Smith, and who I think we both knew, or I know we know of, certainly, used to talk about the dangers of cafeteria religion and that buffet image you brought up. If you just, sample all the goodies, you may not, first of all, you may overeat and get sick, but you may not get the proper nutrition that you need. And so there's a certain discernment quality that I think we all need when we explore beyond familiar grounds. And Sri Ramakrishna used to say, if you just dig holes in a lot of places and never go deep enough to get to the water you're looking for, then the exploring is superficial. So thanks for that. That is, the rewards and pitfalls of exploration. Rami, you talk about in one of your books is called How to Be a Holy Rascal. What is a holy rascal, and how does one become one?
A holy rascal is someone who knows that the religious emperor has no clothes. A holy rascal is like Dorothy's dog Toto in the movie version of The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy and the Scarecrow and Toto are all standing in front of the curtain, and they're hearing this great and terrible wizard, all that, instilling fear in everyone. And then Toto, while the humans are shaking, or the other people are shaking, Toto goes up and he pulls the curtain back and reveals a little man with a big megaphone. A holy rascal is pulling the curtain back on the little men, and I mean that literally, not people, the little men and their big megaphones that run what I call big religion, the way you speak of big pharma and big agra. And it's trying to free yourself from the madness that organized religion is often steeped in. So holy rascals do it with humor, not with anger, but they have a basic stance that that religions are commodities, and they're looking for shelf space. It's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, just to pick three. It's like Coke, Pepsi, and A&W, assuming that Coke and Pepsi don't own A&W. I just don't know, or Dr. Pepper or something like that. But they're all brown sugar water, and they have different labels, and they make these different claims. Coke says we're the real thing. Well, that's like the Jews saying, we're the chosen people, or the Christians saying there is no salvation outside the church. Or when Jesus says, or they have Jesus say in the gospel, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. I mean, that's just exclusive marketing. But it's just marketing. And a Holy Rascal recognizes that and tries to make that clear to anyone who will listen. Excuse me. That the institutions of religion oftentimes are all about, if not all the time, are all about power and control. And you have to go to the mystics of any given religion to get beyond power and control, and to be primed for the experience of being surrendered into the grace of the infinite aliveness.
So Holy Rascals are kind of the court gestures in...
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, that's the role. You use humor to poke. You use humor to reveal to people what they already knew. Most people know that the claims of their religion are silly. I mean, just to stick with my own. I have a book that's looking for a publisher. My agent's seeking a publisher, but so far no one's willing to take it. It's called Judaism Without Craziness. And the idea is, what's crazy? What are the crazy aspects of Judaism? And you could do this with other religions, but I'm a rabbi. So, the notion that there is a God out there in the universe somewhere who chose one people from the Jews, from among all the people of the earth, but, they didn't have a concept of other planets. We'd have to say maybe that God, this God chose the Jews among all the possible species of beings in the universe to receive his, and it's almost, always male, his one and only revelation and the deed to the Holy Land in perpetuity. I mean, that's crazy. What kind of God is that? So, so that's what that book is about. But that's what a Holy Rascal tries to do. Is that's silly. I mean, even who, the whole question of who's a Jew, that my mother determines whether I'm a Jew or not. That makes no sense to me. Right? My mother was, she was a dental, not an assistant. She ran the office, right, of a dentist office. Does that make me an office manager? No, I have to train to be an office manager. It's not in my DNA. So just because my mother is Jewish, I don't think that has anything to do with, whether I'm going to choose to be Jewish or not. I think being Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever it is, it's a choice you make to label yourself in a certain way based on certain behaviors that you engage in, and it's not something you inherit from, through blood, through your DNA. So all those things to me are just crazy things, and Holy Rascals try to point out the crazy, not to insult the religion, but to free the religion from the capture of the marketers and the power players that dominate it.
And without throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I always like that about the concept of Holy Rascal. It's not saying, all of the religions have all these foolish things and therefore abandon the whole enterprise. You point to the deeper.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you read a religion, and obviously this is just my opinion, but if you read a religion literally, it's ridiculous. If you read a religion metaphorically, they're almost always brilliant. So I remember once I was with Father Thomas Keating at a workshop, an interfaith workshop we were doing with other teachers in Texas somewhere. And someone in the group said to him, they asked him a question specifically, is the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ absolutely essential to everyone's salvation? And, in an interfaith setting, you don't want to say yes, right? That's not good, because everyone else is saying, wait a minute, now we have to be Christians. So he, if you, Father Thomas, and he's a very nice guy, and he managed to dance around it, but it was annoying to me. So I said, can I answer the question? So he said, yeah. He said to the group, the rabbi will now answer the question, is the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ absolutely essential to everyone's salvation? And my response was, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is absolutely essential to everybody's salvation, but not sufficient. Jesus, the myth, the story of Jesus on the cross and then the resurrection, but specifically the crucifixion. The story of the crucifixion is paradigmatic of the spiritual process. That, being on the cross, it's like hitting rock bottom. It's the shattering of the small s self, and then Jesus says in the original gospel, which is Mark. The only thing Jesus says on the cross in Mark is, he quotes the book of Psalms, Psalm 22, verse 1. He goes, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that's the dark night of the soul. That's the confrontation with, all the powers that stand arrayed against your being surrendered, and what he's saying, back to the 12-step, he's saying, the God of my understanding, why have you forsaken me? Well, it's got to forsake you, because like Lao Tzu says, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Any theology that you hold has got to be shattered on the cross of reality, or hit rock bottom in such a way that it's shattered and you're free from it. Only when you die to everything do you have a possibility of being resurrected. And so Jesus models that. That's why Jesus says, follow me. Some Bibles have him say, believe in me, where it really should be translated as trust me. But he, more than anything else, he says, follow me. And where's he going? He's going to the cross. Do you trust the teaching enough that you're willing to be crucified and then set free? So it is absolutely essential in the sense that it's paradigmatic, but it's not sufficient. You have to do it.
Rami, that is a perfect way for a good rabbi to conclude a conversation. To honor the rabbi that Jesus was. We have to go now. Folks, you can learn more from Rabbi Rami at rabbirami.com. and his OneRiverFoundation.org, which has a treasure trove of good information and advice. And be sure to join me next week when we'll have another wise and wonderful guest. Meanwhile, you can find me at my website, philipgoldberg.com. You can sign up for my mailings, learn about what I'm up to, read my books, especially in this context, Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times. And look at the archive of the podcast I host, Spirit Matters, at spiritmatterstalk.com, or the new YouTube channel of Spirit Matters Talk. In the meantime, be well, be strong, be safe. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. This is Unity Online Radio, the voice of an awakening world.